All right, is the state prepared to call its next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The state will call Alice Gilbert.
All right.
Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes.
Got her. See, try to speak directly into them. All right, I'll note that Ms. Gilbert's now been placed under oath. Before we begin with testimony, I just want to inquire, have you watched any of this trial on either the live stream or here in person at all?
No,
Okay, have you talked to anybody else about any testimony they've given in trial?
no.
Okay, thank you for letting the court know that. Ms. Blake, you can inquire on direct.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Alice Gilbert, ALICEGILBERT.
And Miss Gilbert, do you know an individual named Chad Daybell?
I do.
How do you know him?
He was my neighbor, and when we moved into the neighborhood, we got to know him through our community and our ward.
Did you also know Tammy or Tamara Daybell?
I do.
And did you know her the same way?
Yes,
And what did you refer to her as, Tammy or Tamara?
I called her Tammy.
And when you moved into the neighborhood, do you recall approximately when that would have been?
It was March of 2017.
And were the Daybells already living there?
Yes,
Did you get to know Tammy or Chad? Did you get to know one of them better than the other one?
Tammy. I got to know Tammy better.
And how did you end up getting to know Tammy?
We worked in the same church calling together. And so I got to know her through that church calling,
And when you say church calling, what church is that associated with?
the LDS church.
And what callings did the two of you hold where you worked closely?
I was the Relief Society president, and she was my first counselor.
How often do you think you saw Tammy?
We met once a week and on Sundays.
And did that seeing each other twice a week continue for an extended period of time?
Until her death.
And do you recall when the two of you were given the callings?
October of 2018.
So for about a year, you would see Tammy about twice a week.
Yes.
Did you get to know Tammy pretty well?
I thought so. I thought we did.
And can you describe Tammy a little bit, your relationship with her? Let me back up. Can you describe a little bit about what Tammy was like?
Yes. She was great to work with. She was organized when we had our meetings. She could do worked on the computer. So when we had to change anything, she could do it in a flash. She did all the computer work. When we organized activities, we valued her opinion and was grateful to have her input on things. And she would say, keep it simple, keep our activities simple. And we did, and that helped a lot. She had a lot of empathy for some of the women who were struggling in the ward, and she would relate those things to us in our meetings. She also had a very good wit with her.
Did you have occasions to observe Chad and Tammy together?
I did mostly at church, um, and they seemed great at church. You know, y- it was just normal. It was, you know, and we had activities. He did come and help set up some chairs for activities, and so that seemed normal, and I really didn't think much of it.
At some point in time, did you feel like their interactions changed?
A little bit, yes. In 2019, it just seemed distant. It just seemed a bit distant between the two.
Did-
But I just noticed them at church.
Did Tammy ever talk to you about her marriage?
She didn't. I think the only thing she did mention was that sometimes the finances were a little strained, but she didn't mention anything else.
When you observed Tammy, did you ever notice her appear to slow down?
No,
Did you ever notice any change in her activity level prior to her death?
no,
Did she ever complain to you about any health issues?
no,
Did you ever observe Tammy have any shaking fits?
no,
Did you ever observe Tammy faint?
no.
How did you learn about Tammy's death?
On the morning of the 19th, I received a phone call from Emma, and she was
Objection, Judge. This is going to call for some hearsay.
It's eliciting hearsay on that part, so that's sustained.
And just to clarify, when you say on the 19th, is that October 19th of 2019?
Yes,
And you indicated that Emma had phoned you. How did Emma seem when you talked to her?
she was sobbing.
And after that, based on that phone call, without saying what Emma said, did you learn anything in relation to Tammy?
That she had passed away.
Objection, Judge. Calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
At some point, did someone else take the phone?
Chad, he took the phone.
And what did Chad tell you?
He asked me not to tell anybody for about an hour that she had passed away. And I said, well, I need to tell the bishop. And he said, no, don't tell the bishop. And I knew that the bishop was he was going to work. And so I called him anyway and informed him.
And what you called to inform him was of Tammy's death?
Yes,
Were you surprised to hear of her passing?
yes.
And why were you surprised?
I had just talked to her on Wednesday and she was fine. She was excited. She had just gotten a new grandbaby. We had talked about Mark and his mission, and she had told us experiences of his mission, and she was excited with things.
On October 19th, after learning of her death, at some point, did you end up going to the Daybell residence?
Yes, my husband and I went over at about 8:30 in the morning, and Chad answered the door, and he gave us a hug, and we went in, and all the children, except for Mark and their spouses, were sitting there in the living room. They were stunned. The children were stunned. They could hardly speak and crying.
Did you end up making any observations of Chad when you arrived?
Yes, when I asked him what happened, and he said that Tammy vomited at midnight, and they think she passed away at 2 a.m. and that her legs were hanging over the bed and that she'd fallen out of bed. He also said they think, how did I say this? That they think she died of an embolism.
And Chad provided all this information the morning of her death.
Yes.
How did Chad appear to you?
He wasn't as upset as the children. He had was ready to tell us, and he wasn't as devastated as the children were.
And you indicated you'd just seen her the Wednesday before her death.
Yeah.
Did she complain to you at all that day of any health issues?
No, and I knew she was taking clogging lessons when we would have activity nights.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point, just going into a narrative.
You can answer.
I can answer. We had activity nights, which started at like, I think 6:30. She would leave early, maybe 8 o'clock, because she was going to a clogging class. And so in my mind, I'm thinking I'm going home to bed at 8 o'clock. She was going to a clogging class. So I would admired her for doing that.
On Wednesday, when you saw her, did Tammy have a cough that you noticed?
No,
Did she have any kind of a coughing fit around that time?
I didn't notice any.
After arriving at the Daybell residence, did you do something else that morning?
Yes, we had asked if they had breakfast and they hadn't. So my husband and I said, well, we'll go get you breakfast. And as we stood up to go, Chad told us that her funeral was going to be on Tuesday and a memorial on Wednesday. And I was surprised and I said, well, did you plan this? And he said, no, but I was surprised that fast that he could tell me that.
And when you ask if he planned it, why did you ask that?
Because I know what it takes to plan a funeral with a ward and to organize the church and have the ladies in the ward provide the meal. And you need to ask the sisters to volunteer to provide meals. And it takes time. All of it takes time. So I was really surprised. But then he said her funeral was in Springville. That also surprised me because we were there in Idaho.
And do you recall what day of the week October 19th was?
Saturday,
And the funeral was going to be on the following-
Tuesday.
And did Chad respond when you asked if he had already planned the funeral or if he and Tammy had talked about it before?
He said no, but I felt like it had been planned.
Did you end up attending the funeral?
Yes. I needed to see her. So my husband and I went to the funeral in Springfield. And I needed to see her in the casket. And she looked nice in the casket.
Did you ever talk to Chad about why he held the funeral in Springville?
I didn't. I just assumed it was because they lived there before. So I didn't ask.
When you were at the funeral, do you recall making any observations of Chad?
When we viewed her before the before the funeral. And it was just him standing by the casket. It didn't seem really mournful with him. He said, I said, oh, she looks good. And he said, yes, she does. And we didn't cry. We didn't, it didn't seem mournful. And then we went into the chapel to sit for the funeral. And I sat by, and our bishop had driven down, so we sat with him.
During the funeral, do you recall if Chad spoke?
Yes, all the children spoke, and he spoke last. I was impressed with the children's talks that fast. They did a nice job to their mother. I was surprised because it takes a day to drive. So to go funeral on Tuesday, they would have driven Monday. They did the children did a nice job. And Chad spoke last. I was surprised because most spouses are too devastated to speak. And so I was surprised that he spoke at her funeral, and it was last. And it was like a church talk. The other talks were more loving tributes to their mother. His was more church talk.
And do you recall if there was a memorial service held?
It was held the next day in Idaho, but I did not attend because I had just been to her funeral.
Did you end up having a role or playing a part in taking a meal to Chad's family?
Yes, so our presidency and the bishopric provided a meal for them after the memorial, and so we took it over to them after, and we had put it down for them to eat, and the kids had started to eat. And Chad told us that he was moving out, that he couldn't be there, and that he was going to move to Rexburg to a condo. And we asked him, like, do you need help or anything? He said no, that his friend had a condo for him, that he wasn't there very often, so that he told him he could stay there.
And you said do you recall, did Chad refer to the friend as a he?
In I took it as that, and I'm thinking he said because he said he wasn't there very often, and so he could stay there.
So Tammy's pronounced dead on Saturday, correct? And by the following Wednesday, Chad's got plans to move out of the house.
Yes.
Do you recall anything else that morning standing out to you as far as what Chad told his kids?
He had told his kids to go through Tammy's things as after he told us he was moving out, and that surprised me too. That's maybe I'm more sentimental, but it just seemed fast. And they kind of took it in stride, and I think they did do that.
In the time just after Tammy's death, did you have an opportunity to observe any of the Daybell children? So Chad and Tammy's children.
I went and saw Emma on Friday, and she was sobbing. She's really struggling, and she was getting really sick. She lost a lot of weight. We had organized meals for her. I know the school district was taking meals into her and Garth. She was struggling. She told me she missed
Judge,
her mother.
objection,
Grounds,
hearsay.
sustain.
Did Emma appear to be struggling to you?
Yes,
Did Garth appear to be struggling as
yeah,
well?
yes.
And on Friday, to the best of your knowledge, had Chad moved out of the residence?
Yes. I think he moved after the memorial
So you visited with Garth and Emma just less than a week after their
on
mother's passing.
Friday. Yeah.
Was Chad there when you went to visit him?
No.
And when you say the house you went to, what house was Emma staying in at that time? Do you recall?
Yeah, she lived Keeney cornered from Chad's house.
And do you know what house Garth was staying in?
And Garth was living in Chad's house.
At some point, did you end up reaching out to Chad?
Yes, so we thought we would call and see how he was doing, and I think it was Saturday, the 26th of October. We called him to see if we could come and visit with him, and he said no, that he would come to our place. So he came, that's on the 26th, he came over to our place. I think it was more toward the evening when he came.
And Judge, for foundation purposes, that would have been the month of what and year?
Like, do you want to clarify when that happened, please?
When you talk about the 26th, are we still in October of 2019?
Yes,
So just shortly after Tammy's passing.
yes.
And Chad indicated to you he didn't want you to come to his place, but he'd come to yours.
Yeah, he said, "Oh, I'll come over to your place." So we said, "Okay."
Did you ever end up seeing where Chad was living in Rexburg?
No,
And did he in fact end up coming to your place?
he did.
And did you end up having a conversation with him at that time?
Yes, he sat at our kitchen table, and I had made cookies and thought that, we would make it nice. And he said that he found the woman he was going to marry. And we were absolutely stunned when he said that. And we asked him, well, where did you meet her? And he said, at the conference in St. George in 2018. And we asked who she was, and he wasn't going to tell us at first. And then he said, well, I'll tell you. Her name is Lori Vallow.
Had you heard the name Lori Vallow before then?
I hadn't, I was thinking, who is Lori Vallow? And then he mentioned that she had done a podcast with Melanie Gibb. And then I realized that's who that was.
Had you ever met Melanie Gibb in person?
Not then. I hadn't met her in person.
And you'd never met Lori Vallow at that point?
No.
And to the best of your recollection, this was around October 26th.
Yes.
So just 7 days after Tammy's passed away.
Yeah.
Were you surprised to hear that Chad had already found someone else to marry?
Absolutely.
At some point, did you end up meeting Lori Vallow?
Yes. While he was at our home, he said that she was in town. Would we like to meet her? We said yes. Tuesday nights, my husband and I had gone to the temple. So we were in the temple on Tuesday nights. We were waiting in a room for a meeting to begin that following Tuesday. And he tapped us on the shoulder and had us step out in the hallway. And then that's where we met Lori and her niece Melanie and a friend. I cannot remember her name.
And that was your first time meeting Lori.
Yes.
And it was at the temple.
It was at the temple.
And Judge, could we have some foundation as to the date, time?
Your Honor, that's already been discussed.
I must have missed it, Judge.
Go ahead, Ms. Blake.
Ms. Gilbert, at some point after that, did Chad and Lori end up coming to your house?
Yes. And it was in that week, and I think it was Friday from that Tuesday that he came over with her. And it was cold when they came in. I asked her if she was getting used to the cold, and she said she'd bought some warm clothes. And they sat on the couch. And it was awkward.
And when you say it was awkward, did you make observations of Chad and Lori's interactions?
Yes, they were very affectionate with each other, more than I had ever seen Chad. It was very affectionate with her, and they were giggling and laughing, and my husband and I were embarrassed.
Had you ever seen Chad act that way with Tammy?
No.
Did you end up talking at that time to Lori about her family?
I did. I asked her if she'd been married, and she said yes, that her husband had died in December of a heart attack. I asked her if she had children. And then Chad said that she had recently had a daughter that had passed. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I said, "How many?" And she said, "Thank you." And I said, "How many children do you have?" And she kind of stammered and said they were stepchildren, and I did not get a definite answer on that.
When Chad said that she'd recently lost a daughter, did Lori say anything to correct that or change it?
No.
And this would have occurred end of October, beginning of November of 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
You also talked about, you asked Lori if she was getting used to the cold. Do you recall anything about that particular October?
Yes, it was a very cold October. It was an early frost and a hard frost. So the farmers were getting their potatoes early. I used to work for an ag company, and so the importance of the potatoes not freezing. And not only that, they were helping each other to get their crops out early. So it was a cold October.
When Chad and Lori were there, did they talk to you and your husband about plans for a future together?
Yes, they had talked about getting married, but they didn't know when or where yet. They planned on taking the kids to Disneyland at Thanksgiving time.
And did Chad tell you anything about his plans to write a book?
Yes, he told us he was going to Hawaii to write a book. But I didn't know they were going to live there. He just said he was planning on writing a book and going to Hawaii.
So Chad mentioned he was going to be going to Hawaii,
Mhm.
correct?
Yes.
And he and Lori also mentioned their plans to get married to you.
Judge, there's been some leading here.
Sustained.
And this took place in end of October, beginning of November 2019.
Yes.
When they talked about taking the kids to Disneyland, do you know which kids they were referencing?
It was Chad's children.
Did they ever mention taking any of Lori's children with them?
No, I had the impression that she was an empty nester, and I assumed the daughter was older that had passed, from a disease or cancer or something, but I assumed she didn't have any other children.
Did Chad or Lori provide you any details as to how Lori's daughter died?
No, and I did not ask.
And Your Honor, I'm just looking at the time and now may be a good time to take a break in testimony for the lunch hour.
Okay, I appreciate that, Ms. Blake. We will go ahead and take the noon lunch hour. We'll take the hour and be back on for additional testimony at 1 o'clock.
All right, please. This report's again in session.
All right, thank you. If we could please have the jurors brought in, I think they're lined up.
All right.
Oh. All rise. I was gonna say I would say it, but it's a full crowd today.
Here's all President Tamara for your honor.
All right, thank you. Please be seated. Okay, we're back on the record on case CR 22-21-1623, State of Idaho versus Chad Guy Daybell. We just concluded our lunch recess. Ms. Gilbert is on the stand under direct examination at this time, the state continuing. And I will remind the witness, you're still under oath for your testimony. With that, once you're ready, Ms. Blake, you can proceed with your continuing direct.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Ms. Gilbert, I think we left off, I'd ask you if Chad or Lori provided you any details regarding how Lori's daughter died.
No,
And you talked about going to clean a house. Was that Emma's house?
that was Emma's house when we took meals to her and that, and she had gotten quite sick. And so I'd gone to clean her house and for her.
At some point, did you learn that Lori's children were missing?
I did learn, let's see. I believe it was after in November, I learned that they were missing. And I learned who their mother was and that she was married to Chad. So my husband and I called Chad and asked him, are these her children that are missing? And he said that, yes, that it was a custody battle and that when everything came out, it would be fine.
And would this have been after Chad and Lori had told you of their plans to get married?
Yes, I think it was after they were married.
And after that visit in late October, early November, where both Chad and Lori were present, did you learn whether or not Chad was still in Idaho?
He was still in Idaho when they came to visit us. And then it's when I cleaned Emma's house, I believe, and that's when she told me they had gotten married.
Did you learn where Chad had gotten married?
Yes,
And where was that?
in Hawaii.
After his marriage, did Chad ever come to your residence again?
Yes, he came and showed us wedding pictures of their wedding there in Hawaii, and was quite excited to show us his wedding pictures.
And do you recall approximately how much how much time had passed between he and Lori's first visit to your house and then that second visit when they were married?
I think it was 2 weeks.
Were you surprised to see wedding photos?
Yes.
And why were you surprised?
I was surprised they'd got married so early. I was really surprised when they had told me they didn't know when or how, but then I was surprised that it was so early.
And you were friends with Tammy, right?
Yes.
At some point after that visit, when Chad and Lori showed you the wedding photos, did Chad come to your residence again?
Yes.
Do you recall approximately when that would have been?
He came after Lori was arrested in Hawaii, and he had moved back to Idaho, and he came and asked if he could, first asked if he could I think it was when her first bond was gonna come up. And that's when he asked us if we would put our house up for her bond.
And prior to asking for you to put up the bond, do you recall if he ever asked if he could live with you?
Yes, he did.
And what did you tell him?
Well, first it was, y- it was like an overnight, if he could be overnight. And, um, and I was okay with an overnight, but I could not let him live with us. So we told him that our daughter was gonna move in and there wouldn't be any room.
And then he'd ask you to consider putting up some bond money or putting up your property, is that correct?
Judge, I'm gonna object at this point. We're getting a little leading.
Sustained.
And I think you had previously indicated that he asked you about bond. Do
Yes.
you recall what he asked you in relation to that?
When he came in, he was quite upset, and he said he had to get her out of jail, and that he cried and he said it was just killing her to be in jail, and could we put our house up for bond? And we asked him if he had family that could help him. He said no. And he mentioned another friend, I think. He said he couldn't help him. And we said we would think about it, and I think that was a Saturday. Sunday, we got a text from him, and he wanted to bring the bondswoman to our home and to meet her at our house that Sunday.
And did you in fact have another conversation with Chad about posting bond or putting your property up?
Yes, there was 2 conversations. This was the first one.
And what did you ultimately end up deciding?
No.
During your conversation with Chad regarding the bond, do you recall anything about the comment previously made about Lori's daughter dying coming up?
Yes, because I asked him, how many daughters does Lori have? And he said, 1. And I said, well, when we met you, you told me she had a daughter that passed away. And he said, no, I didn't. And I said, yes, you did. And then when I asked him about the missing children, and he said it was a custody battle. So that's why I asked, how many daughters does she have? And then he denied telling me that.
Did you learn the name of Lori's daughter?
I only learned not through him. I didn't.
Have you since heard the name Tylee?
Yes,
Do you recall specifically talking to Chad about Tylee?
I did. When he asked about the bond, I was a little miffed that he had asked that. And so I felt, I'm asking you some questions. So I asked him, where are the children? And I asked him, where's Tylee? I said, she's a teenager. So I said, doesn't she want a life? and come out and say, I'm the missing girl. I want a job and a life and a boyfriend. And he just said she didn't like people and she didn't like me.
Did something stick out about those statements?
He said didn't.
So he used the past tense.
He did.
And backing up a little bit, do you recall a time in February of 2019 when Chad was at your residence?
Yes. He had come over. We were working on a bedroom floor and he came over, and as he was leaving, that's when he mentioned that he had a vision or such that Tammy was going to pass away. He didn't know how or when, but before her 50th birthday.
And do you recall around that same time Chad saying anything about Tammy and games on a computer?
Yes, he had told my husband and I that Tammy liked to play some games on the computer, and that he had told her that her grandmother, I think, but she was dead, had come to him and told him to tell her that she was not happy with Tammy on the computer, that she was wasting her time on the computer.
When Chad made the comment about Tammy going to die, did Tammy have any health issues that you were aware of?
No, in fact, I kind of just passed it off. I didn't really take it serious, honestly, because she wasn't.
If I may have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge. Ms. Gilbert, can you tell me how often on a weekly basis you would see Tammy Daybell?
We had our meetings on Wednesday mornings, and then I would see her on Sunday.
At church?
Yeah.
So, and how long were the meetings on Wednesday morning?
Oh, an hour to 2 hours.
Okay, and how many people were present at that meeting when you would see her for those Wednesday meetings?
There were 4 of us.
Okay, and that was about for 2 hours.
That was the longest.
Okay, that was a long meeting?
That was the longest we went.
Oh, the longest you go. Okay, and then as far as church is concerned, did you sit next to each other at church?
No, sometimes in our second meeting, we sat by each other because it was our presidency, but not in the first meeting.
Okay, so church would last about how long on a Sunday?
2 hours.
Okay. So you would see her for about 3 to 4 hours a week?
Yeah.
Would that be fair? Okay. And then after the birth of Emma's child, the Daybell family would sit at the back of the church. Is that right? You recall that?
Objection, Your Honor. Facts not in evidence. Counsel's testifying. Move to strike.
World.
So the location of where they would sit, generally, do you recall that they would sit in the front of the church in the beginning?
Not quite in the front, maybe the middle.
Okay. And then after Emma's child was born, they would, out of respect, they
Sometime,
moved to
yeah.
the back. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, do you have any recollection of Chad spending mornings at the Salem church every morning with his truck parked up there?
Objection, Your Honor. Facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
Do you have any information about Chad parking his truck up at the Salem church every morning
On Sunday morning?
every morning? during
Oh,
the-
no,
during
I
the
have
week?
no idea every
Okay.
morning.
And you do understand that Tammy's family was from Springville, right?
Yes,
And so it wouldn't have been particularly unusual for Tammy to have a service in Springville out of respect to her family over there, correct?
no, and I didn't.
Okay. You made mention of something about our presidency, and my notes say Bishop provided a meal. Talk to me about that a little bit.
So the four of us in our Relief Society presidency, and I had contacted the bishop, and he wanted to be part of that. So us three sisters now in the Relief Society provided the meal, and the bishop included in on that.
And then my notes say the 26th of October is the date that Chad mentioned that he met Lori when he was talking with you, and he mentioned that he met Lori Vallow at a conference in St. George, Utah.
Right.
And that was sometime in very late of 2018, right?
I believe that conference was
Okay.
in 2018.
And you mentioned that the way you knew Lori Vallow was through a person by the name of Melanie Gibb.
Right.
And you know Melanie Gibb as someone who's deeply involved in the Preparing the People movement and those sort of organizations, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Facts not in evidence. Counsel's testifying.
Sustained.
How do you know Melanie Gibb?
I think, I don't know how we came upon her podcast, and I was trying to remember how we knew of her podcast. But I didn't know Lori, and so we just wanted to listen to Melanie's.
Okay.
And then that's where I heard of Lori, is through on her podcast.
So did you know of Melanie through the fact that she had a podcast, or did you know her through her participation in the Preparing the People movement?
I just knew her through the podcast.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, you mentioned that Chad talked to you about taking all of the kids to Disneyland. Is it possible they said Knott's Berry Farm?
I heard Disneyland.
Okay. Okay. Have you been to Chad's house?
Yes.
Okay. And is it fair to say that it's a one-story house?
There's an addition to the house.
Right.
You walk through a breezeway, and then there's stairs that goes up.
Right. And when you say an addition, it's more of a building that's.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying. Witness has already said.
Sustained.
Okay. Are you aware that attachment to the back of the house doesn't have any electric?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Are you aware that the attachment to the house that build on doesn't have any heat?
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying. Facts not in evidence. Move to strike.
Sustained. Mr. Pryor, it's got to be questioning, not just testimony through your question.
Well, Judge, I'm asking her if she's aware.
Well, I know, but there's a proper way to do that with facts from the witness, not from you.
Do you have you been in that addition that's attached to the house?
I have.
Okay. Do you have any information about what utilities are available in that building?
I don't. I didn't look
Okay.
at that
Okay.
part.
And are you aware that nobody uses that?
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying or attempting to testify. Move to strike.
Sustained.
Do you have any knowledge about any of the family members utilizing any of that portion of the addition?
I knew that Garth had a ham radio set up, and I think a drum set.
Okay.
there. I don't know on their living conditions.
Okay. Were you aware of their living conditions in the primary residence?
I just knew of where Tammy's room was at.
Okay. And that's Chad's room as well?
I assume so.
Okay. And then in the other bedroom would be whose room?
I don't know which rooms the kids, whose room was what.
Okay. At the time of Tammy's passing, do you know who was living in the residence at the time?
I believe Garth was.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm not sure if Seth was or not.
Okay.
He could have been.
Okay. And then obviously you previously mentioned something about Emma living kitty corner from the house, right?
Right. And then Mark was coming home from his mission, so he would have lived there, but
Okay.
not yet.
And the other daughter lives somewhere in Utah, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you indicated that Chad openly spoke to you about the Disneyland, discussed it with you openly, right?
Yeah, just that they were going to take the kids to Disneyland.
Okay, so at around the time of October, when these discussions, I believe these discussions were in October, right?
Right.
He wasn't trying to hide his whereabouts in any way, was he?
He didn't with us.
And he wasn't trying to conceal where he was going on trips and vacations, correct?
No, not with us. He didn't.
And he openly discussed with you his plans for the future, correct?
That he was going to go to Hawaii and write a book.
And did you get the impression from Chad when he was talking about the children, that he felt the children were still alive?
I didn't know of missing children then.
Okay, well, that wasn't really my question. My question was, at the time he was talking to you about the children, did she,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. I'm sorry, ma'am. It's okay. I mean, I know this is nerve-wracking. And
I'm
it-
not sure which time.
Okay, it's okay. But at the time you've had discussions with Chad about the children, based on his demeanor, did you get the impression that he felt the children were still alive?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
I I felt like he was avoiding it. I didn't get I couldn't get a straight answer.
Okay. So when he told you that when the truth comes out and that you felt it was a custody case, that didn't give you the impression that when the truth came out, it was a custody case, that the children's whereabouts would be told to everybody?
That's what he told me, but I
Okay.
was confused.
Okay,
From
it's
the other-
okay. Judge, that's all I have. Thank you, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you have any idea where Chad went every morning?
I have no idea.
And you didn't talk about that, right?
No, I do know that because we didn't leave our home every morning, so I asked, sometimes we saw his vehicle wasn't there, so I think I asked him where he did go. He said he went to the college,
So not the church, but the college.
to the library.
And you've been in the Daybell residence, correct?
Right.
And you talked about there are stairs in that residence?
There is to get it.
Judge, I'm going to object. Mischaracterization.
Overruled.
So at least all of the residence is not one story. Is that fair?
Right.
And you were asked about Chad sharing with you his plans for the future. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And his plans for the future, as far as what he told you, were what again?
that he was going to Hawaii, but they did talk about marriage, but they didn't know when or where.
So the plans included going to Hawaii,
Mhm.
correct?
Right,
And the plans also included marrying Lori Vallow.
right.
When Chad first mentioned Lori's daughter, again, he referred to her as dead.
Judge, I'm going to object. There's not only is it leading.
Overruled.
He did. As I was asking her about her husband, and he mentioned that she just had a daughter that had passed.
So from that conversation, Chad knew or believed one of Lori's children was dead.
Yeah.
Are you aware that Lori's children were found on Chad Daybell's property?
Judge,
Yes.
objection.
Grounds.
It's now, I'll withdraw, Judge, at this point. That's fine.
Are you aware Lori's children's remains were found on Chad Daybell's property?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
All right, that will conclude the testimony then of this witness. Does the state have any intention of a recall of this witness?
No, Your Honor.
Will the defense intend to recall her or have her brought in your case in chief, Mr. Pryor?
No, Judge, I don't think so.
Okay, then you are released from any subpoena. Court appreciates your testimony and appearing for trial. You may go ahead and step down. Thank you.